Well, good morning, everybody. It's Friday morning and welcome to Pen Vicarage. Lovely to see you and thank you so much for being with us as we continue our adventure through the book Exodus this morning. And today we're in Exodus chapter 12. It's quite a long chapter, so I'll read the whole chapter and I'll explain it to you afterwards. Exodus chapter 12. Here we go. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It will be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it should join its closest neighbour in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided into proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, and the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintels of the houses on which they eat it. They shall eat of the lamb that same night, and they shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. You shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it hurriedly. It's the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass over the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals, and all the gods of Egypt will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a solemn assembly, and on the 7th day a solemn assembly. No work shall be done on those days, only what everyone must eat. That alone may be prepared by you. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread. From this very day I brought your companies out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout your generations as a perpetual ordinance. In the first month, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day, you shall eat unleavened bread. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses. Whoever eats what is leavened shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether an alien or a native in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your settlements you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go select lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that's in the basin, and touch the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood on the basin. None of you shall go outside of the door of your house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintels and the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you down. You shall observe this rite as a perpetual ordinance for you and your children. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this observance. And when your children ask you, what do you mean when you observe by this observance? You shall say, it's a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. For he passed over the houses of Israelites in Egypt, and he struck down the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites went and did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials, and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Rise up, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing to me too." The Egyptians urged the people to hasten their departure from the land, for they said, "We shall all be dead." For the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The Israelites had done as Moses told them, and they asked the Egyptians for jewelry of silver and gold and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favour in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have what they asked. So they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. A mixed crowd also went up with them, and livestock in great numbers, both flocks and herds. They baked unleavened cakes of the dough that had been brought out of Egypt. It was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor they prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the Israelites had lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the companies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. That was for the Lord a night of vigil, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is a vigil to be kept for the Lord by all the Israelites throughout their generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the ordinance for the Passover. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any slave who's been purchased may eat of it after he's been circumcised. No bound or hired servant may eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any animal outside of the house. You shall not break any of its bones. The whole congregation of Israel shall celebrate it. If an alien who resides with you wants to celebrate the Passover to the Lord, all his males shall be circumcised, and that then he may draw near to celebrate it, and he shall be regarded as a native of the land. But no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law for the native and for the alien who resides among you." All the Israelites did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. On that day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, company by company. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so the Israelites had been in Egypt for 430 years. They'd gone there originally under Joseph. They'd been there 430 years. And for about the first 350, things had been fine. But about the last 80 or so, they'd been slaves. I reckon it's about 80 years or something. They were horribly enslaved, and they were treated very cruelly. And they cried to God. God had heard their cry. God had risen up Moses. Moses had been given a message by God, said to Pharaoh, "Let my people free." Moses had given signs, and a whole series of plagues had happened, but Pharaoh just dug his heels in and said, "No, I will not let you go." But finally, in this final plague here, the devastating plague of the firstborn son, we actually see Pharaoh finally capitulates, and he capitulates completely. Without any, in the end, he tells them to go. Go, because we're all dead. And the people of Egypt are just so pleased to see the back of them, and they're quite happy to give them jewelry and all sorts of things and everything else. But in the end, the Israelites do leave. They leave on their own terms. They leave quickly live in a hastily way, but they leave with dignity as well. They don't go through the back door. They don't slip out. They leave quickly, but with dignity, and that's quite noticeable as well. So finally, in this chapter today, we have the description of how it happens. And the first 30 verses or so are Moses telling the people of Israel what to do. The actual plague is actually given about 3 or 4 verses in the middle. And then in the end, you get the actual departure from Egypt. So, as I say, you get a huge preamble about the description about the Passover meal. Then you get sort of 3 or 4 verses about the actual Passover itself, the deliverance bit itself, and then a few verses at the end about how the people are to leave. But I think what's sort of quite interesting about this is, like I say, there's not much focus really on the actual plague itself. Most of the focus seems to be on the rather, well, almost tedious descriptions of what they're supposed to do with this festival of unleavened bread. I mean, you get the impression you really aren't supposed to have 11 at this time, are you? There's a huge great description about that. But I think what this is really about is it's about keeping the rumour alive. What's happening here is that God gave this mighty act of deliverance. The people of Israel were enslaved. God heard their cry and God set them free. It was a mighty act of God, indisputably, absolutely, totally. It was an act of God. It wasn't an act of cleverness by Moses. It wasn't mighty power by the Israelites or anything like that. It was the fact that God had acted, and God had acted decisively. So what God tells them to do is have this festival of unleavened bread, this Passover feast every year. And the whole purpose of it is by the things that they did year in, year out, to remind the people what God had done all those years ago. And it's all got kind of, all the bits of the meal have all got something to say for them. So you've got the bitter herbs, which is the reminder of the slavery which they endured before. You've got the blood of the lamb. The lamb, of course, we put on the lintel, a reminder of the protection which God gave them at that time too. And the fact that they are to gird their loins, they have it with their sandals on, like you'd be if you had to leave in a hurry. And the whole purpose of the unleavened bread thing I don't think it's necessarily against leaven per se. I think what it's really about is bread cooks much more quickly, as I understand it, if you haven't got to wait to leaven it. So the whole purpose of the meal is to demonstrate the fact that it was done in a hurry. And the kind of meal that you might have if you thought you were going to be, if you knew you were having to leave very, very quickly tonight. You might eat with your shoes on and your coat on, as if kind of ready to go. Eat kind of fast food and that kind of, as if that's really what it's kind of saying here. It's a symbol. It's about keeping the rumour alive and reminding the people year in, year out what God had done. So the Jews to this day reenact this Passover meal to remind them that God acted all those years ago. And I just think we have to recognise that the same for us is true with the Eucharist, Holy Communion, Mass, call it whatever you like. What we're doing in that is we are remembering Jesus. Jesus, whenever you do this in remembrance of me. And it's interesting that the Last Supper, which Jesus had with his friends, was a Passover meal. And in a sense, Jesus kind of, dare I say, Jesusized what they were already doing. They were remembering God's mighty act in Egypt. What we remember is God's mighty act in Jesus, in sending Jesus, the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus. We are reminding ourselves what God has done for us. And it's really important that we keep doing it. And please, friends, do come to church and do share in this so that we can keep the rumour, so we can remind ourselves, we can remind the public, we can remind the people around us what God did. And that's why it's important to have things like Christmas and Easter and so on, to keep the stories going, keep the Bible stories there, to remind ourselves of what God did. So the Jews have this Passover meal, which they celebrate to this day, to remind them of the mighty act of God all those years ago. And the whole meal kind of represents bits and bits of the story of that. So likewise with us, when we eat the bread and we drink the wine, we remember what Jesus did at the Last Supper. We remember the mighty act of God in sending his Son, in the death and the resurrection and the ascension and the sending of the Holy Spirit. The whole thing reminds us of Jesus, because Jesus said, whenever you do this, do it in remembrance of me. So friends, as I always say on Friday, come to church, come and join us. Let's remind ourselves what God has done for us. Let's remind ourselves of the mighty acts of God, and let's celebrate God's goodness in our lives. My friends, bless you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely Friday, and God bless you.